Hello, and welcome to Tales from the Archives. I'm your host, Dan Dick. Welcome to this week's episode about fascinating people, places, and events from the Mennonite Heritage Archives. This week's story features Dale Hildebrand, an award-winning filmmaker whose work spans genres of documentary, action, drama, and comedy. Dale grew up on a farm in the Halberstadt area of Manitoba. His latest film takes him back to his roots. Where the Cottonwoods Grow is a documentary about the 1874 Mennonite migration from Imperial Russia to Manitoba and the hardships the newcomers endured as they settled in a new land. I spoke with Dale via an online meetup. Welcome to Tales from the Archives, Dale.
Thank you very much, Stan. Thank you for having me.
The word cottonwoods has big meaning here in Manitoba. It's a very symbolic tree for a lot of folks, and that word is in your title. Why did you choose that?
You know, I think you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly it. I mean, I grew up with rows of cottonwood trees, the middle of summer snowfall of cottonwood trees. And to me, they were symbolic of transplanting from what was Imperial Russia, today's Ukraine, to the West. Researching this piece, it's a lot of, academia, but also a lot of lore. So how do you combine the two? And there's stories that people brought over cottonwoods from Russia. I don't know if that's true, and there's scholars that say it's not. Some people say it is. The point is, they used them as markers, as a footnote, as an imprint of their existence and the planting and the transplanting of their village to the West. And you see to this day, some of the villages still have prominent cottonwood trees that mark their existence.
What compelled you to make this particular film?
A lot of projects I've done sort of focuses on immigrants or immigration and the idea of, by better understanding your neighbor, you're less likely to inflict harm on them.
Conrad Stace, who is the archivist at the Mennonite Heritage Archives, makes an appearance early in the film. If you zoom out in your career, what's the role of archives in general in the way you approach making a film?
In this film, I mean, it's all about archive. The actual first ship that the Mennonites took across, we found the blueprints to the actual sister ship for that boat. And we built the CGI boat out of those blueprints. The boat in our movie are based on the actual blueprints. So to me, that's wild, you know what I mean? To reenact, to resurrect. Even the ox cart that we filmed, we were trying to find some grassland. So we found some grassland, original grassland piece in Stewartburn area. So we brought the ox cart there. We had a reenactment cast and crew and all that sort of stuff. But even that takes on a certain look and a feel and a texture to give it, like, hopefully it's another little piece that we found from another archive somewhere in the world.
You grew up on the family farm in Halberstadt, Manitoba. Your great-grandparents migrated from Imperial Russia to Canada. Were you raised with that sense of awareness about your family roots being so far away?
The way we grew up and the way we lived, I feel we always had that sort of groundedness, that connection to the earth, or the connection to the roots of the cottonwoods. And like the farm that we grew up, we had a single hand pump in our house. We had a cash and carry toilet. My second oldest sister was born in a horse-drawn sleigh in the middle of a 40 below blizzard on the way to the hospital in Altona. And also being able to speak a bit of Low German, understanding it a fair amount more. I think you carry it with you.
Did your parents and grandparents pass on down to you stories about the migration story from Imperial Russia? Was that part of your growing up too?
No, my grandparents, I never knew. I remember one of my grandmothers, but I was very young when they all died. And so my parents did not pass it on necessarily, those stories. And I think maybe that's why my sister Eleanor took on that role. I guess perhaps even though they've passed, I think we still, as children, we always try to do them proud in some form or another. and hopefully this does in some small way.
You mentioned your sister Eleanor again. Not only was she integral to your compulsion to make the film and researching and helping you write, but she also acts in it. Is that right?
She played the reader. So the reader in the film, what we do is we start the film with a woman, which is played by my eldest sister Eleanor, walking across the snowy, barren land of Manitoba and past the leafless cottonwood trees, which are the actual trees from my old farm that I grew up on. And then she goes into a house barn in New Berktal, through the house barn where we have these beams of light shining through it, and we get into the house portion of the house barn. She opens the door, and there's a gathering of women who have gathered there for the day to create a quilt. And she opens up this book that she's carried with her. And the book is filled with stories and letters of 50 years old, earlier. So this is, in essence, 1924, and she's telling the stories of 1874 of the migration. So as she's telling the stories during the whole quilting session, each chapter, in a sense, is another quilt patch in the quilts. So by the end of the film, they've made a quilt and we've told the story.
You've painted a wonderful scene, a wonderful word picture of that opening scene and that storytelling part, and it's all women. Tell me about the choice of casting the main storyteller from a female perspective.
You know, after the film Women Talking, I didn't want to turn this film into men mansplaining because many of the journals were written by young men or elderly men. Very few we could find written by women. And we looked, we searched, we tried to find stories around the 1870, 1875. There were some later and stuff like that. But in essence, what we're doing is we're allowing the women to carry forth the stories. They are the future storytellers. They are carrying forward to the next generation. You also get a sense throughout this story that the women that took this journey, they were strong, strong women. And they endured a lot. And there were a lot of loss of children. In Fort Dufferin alone, while they were there for 4 to 6 weeks, 30 children died.
The film often references food, what the migrants brought with them when they migrated and what was available when they arrived in Manitoba or what was not available. What was it about the food aspect of the story that jumped out at you in your research?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I'm a big fan of chilcha, so I got to have food in there somehow. Um, you know, I guess there were some really neat stories that we could include in this. Part of the thing is they had to pack food that they could travel with. So if they bring in bread that's damp and that it's going to be moldy in 3 days, what are they going to do? So they had to dry it, and they make reisha, which is, you know, I've never understood the reisha as a kid because my sisters would all eat it, and it's this dry bread. Yet they would dip it in coffee and make it wet again. I didn't figure it out. So, anyways, this one gentleman he's in Liverpool and he has this big bag of iraisha that he's carrying with him, and unfortunately, he falls off a gangplank into the ocean. But he's saved by the iraisha that keeps him afloat, sort of thing, you know. So there's little stories like that we can bring into the film, but also the survival of that first winter in 1874. They had no food. They ran out of food. Winnipeg ran out of food. They ran out of wheat. The Winnipeg had a population of 2,000 people at the time. There was a shipment coming from up the Red River, and it was frozen in Emerson, frozen in the water, and it had wheat in there. So in a blizzard, they took, I think, 40 ox carts to this ship, this steamboat that was frozen into the Red River and got wheat from that. And I think, I forget how many days it took them to do this in a storm, 40 below and all that sort of stuff. No oxen died or anything like that, but they survived and they got food. But, the thing about it, they were eating things like what was called prips, which is boiled barley. I roasted barley to make, a ad hoc type of coffee. They made wassermoes, which is water and wheat. It was the only food they had was water and wheat. Pick a form of it. It was water and wheat. So they were kind of limited, and the wheat sacks even provided another purpose, and they became patches on clothing as well. So yeah, the food was limited, so food was top of mind for everyone at the time because it was so limited.
Did you make any discoveries, something that meant something really special to you personally?
Beyond our Mennonite community, we have the great grandnephew or something like that of Louis Riel, who is the Métis ox cart builder. And he is in the film, and he comes to all the Q&As with us, and he's brilliant. He's wonderful, and he's great, he's great storyteller. We also have the great grandson of Chief Yellowquill, who speaks, and we filmed him at the Lower Fort Garry. And what we try to do is we try to film at a lot of historical sites. We had Lower Fort Garry. We had a lot of stuff at Manitoba, the Mennonite Historical Village. They were brilliant. And so he speaks on the Treaty 1. His great-great-grandfather was the original signatory for Treaty 1. The idea of bringing these people was a lot of fun, but is also turned out to be brilliant because the story that Chief Yellowquill tells, it is riveting and it is powerful, and we get a lot of comments about it in the film.
In previous works about the Mennonite migration story told by other folks, the part the Métis and the First Nations folks played in helping Mennonites settle was often overlooked, but you made a different decision here. Can you say more about that decision process to include the Indigenous and Métis voices?
You know, we're in a different era right now, and I think we have a responsibility. The Mennonites and the Métis and the Indigenous people were all caught in the crosshairs of colonization at this time. As Ernie Brown spoke in the documentary, if you wanted an ox cart, if you wanted a scout, if you wanted a land surveyor, if you wanted medicinal things, you reached out to the Métis people or the Indigenous people, and they helped you. Not only that was there help going towards Mennonite, it went back and forth. Midwives shared stuff, and the Métis women or the Indigenous women would share practices or things that they knew from the herbal aspect or the plants that existed in Manitoba that the Mennonite people had no idea about. I think there was a great sense of coexistence. But what I didn't want to do was whitewash this whole idea of colonization. I wanted to show a sense of respect to all parties. And I wanted to show that I think they all learned from each other.
Was there a particularly difficult part of this migration and settler story that hit you really personally?
One of the patches in this quilt is a patch of a young girl's dress. When a family arrived in Halifax, I think she had smallpox at the time, and she died, and they gave her a sea burial in the Halifax harbor, and I guess they hid this fact because otherwise they could have been quarantined for a very long time. They were unsure if they'd get sent back to Europe. And then what we incorporated in the quilting sequence is this little dress being put into the quilt. And one of the women, several of the women, very emotional during this point. And it's kind of heart-wrenching.
Thanks so much, Dale, for taking time to speak with me. I wish you all the best with Where the Cottonwoods Grow and your future projects.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it, Dan.
You can find a screening schedule for Where the Cottonwoods Grow at the Manitoba Mennonite Historical Society's website at mmhs.org/Cottonwoods. To listen to this episode online and see some images from Dale's film, visit mharchives.ca.
Thanks for listening to Tales from the Archives. I'm Conrad Stace, and I'm the archivist at the Mennonite Heritage Archives. Thanks to our partners, Canadian Mennonite University, Centre for Transnational Mennonite Studies, and Mennonite Church Canada. This program is made possible through the support of Golden West Radio and listeners like you. If you want to support the program and the work of the archives, you can find out how to do that on our website at www.mharchives.ca and click on Support.
I'm your host, Dan Dick. This episode was created by Kaylee Dick, Conrad Stace, and me. Tales from the Archives will return next week with more stories about people, places, and events from Mennonite history. Thanks for listening.